Hello everybody and welcome back into Cult Film Cafe with me, one of your hosts, Jonathan, and I'm joined as always by my partner in crime, Kenzie McLean.
Hello there.
And the guest on this week's episode is a big connection to me. This is somebody who's known me probably for the last 25 plus years or so.
Yep.
It is Nicholas Hill.
Hello there, everyone.
So yeah, just to give you a quick idea of the podcast, just to be short and sweet, as if you haven't already listened. So we're exploring 100 must-see cult movies poster, where on each episode the guest picks one of the films off the list, and we dive into that from various different aspects, which will become more apparent when you listen to the episode. Now, as I have previously just said, the guest gets to pick the film they want to talk about. So Nick, what film did you choose?
Flash Gordon, the movie.
What plaything can you offer me today?
The planet Earth.
What's happening?
It's an attack!
Pathetic Earthlings! Who can save you now?
Flash! They'll kill you!
Let's all team up and fight him.
Prepare for torture!
I want him.
Stop at nothing.
Flash, I love you! But we only have 14 hours to save the Earth!
Flash Gordon is still alive.
Gordon's alive? Die! Yes!
Must be my lucky day.
So yeah, as we do in all the episodes, the first follow-up question is, why Flash?
Well, it takes me back to my childhood. I mean, I must have been I'm guessing about 12 when I first saw it. And it'd probably been about Christmas time, in the era when you got your big movies shown at Christmas. So it'd probably be a couple of years after it had a theatrical release. So it takes me back to Christmas, getting the radio times and the TV times to circle my films that I was going to watch. But yeah, it's just a childhood thing, which, like most guys my age now, we never grew out of. We just bring our childhood along with us as we get older.
Fair. I think that's what, now doing multiple podcasts, I think that there's a couple of reasons why people pick films off the list. One, nostalgic reasons, or two, it's just a film that they really love. But yeah, this is going to be another one of these assumptions that I shouldn't make about Kenzie, but probably a first watch for you, Kenzie.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I have heard of the film, but I had just never watched it. Didn't really know, well, I knew like a tiny bit about it, but yeah, so this is very fresh for me.
This is a film that's one of the... I have memories of this being on the television, like on repeat reruns all the time. It seems like one of those films to me.
Oh yeah, I mean it was quite regular, and again I think it's part of an awful lot of the 80s movies, which you would get. I think someone may have mentioned out Channel 5 on the Sunday afternoon an awful lot.
That was Jamie on Big Trouble when he was talking about the Goonies.
Yeah, on that. So, and it's one of those sorts of films which quite often you will watch it again, but not necessarily from the beginning to the end. You're channel surfing. Oh, look, we're about 20 minutes in. I've got 15 minutes to spare. This is a good scene, and you'll watch it. And so it can become a bit mixed up, these sorts of films, because you just feel that they're like an old friend you can pop in and see, and then disappear again if you need to.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing about the film, or if it's a mark against or a mark for. But
I think it's a Mark IV, but I'm slightly biased if I can say that.
You picked the film, so yeah. Just for anybody out there who isn't familiar with the film is based on a King Features comic strip from the 30s of the same name by Alex Raymond, and it follows Flash, who in the comics, I'm right in saying, was a polo player.
And he went to Harvard as well, but they changed it for the film because, well...
I don't know why when we get onto that, it seems like there was no reason for that, because you never get to see him play American football or anything like that.
Yeah, but you've got that scene earlier in the
film. I
which
get that.
I think it might have been a bit difficult as a polo player.
Well, how he could have just had a big mallet and started hitting people with it.
I don't think Ming would allow him to have a mallet in front of him, but it's an interesting plot device there.
Yeah, so, yeah, basically follows Flash, it's a bit of a weird comic. He essentially becomes an astronaut, space traveller guy for, is it Dr. Zarkov, who's the
And Zarkov, who's the brilliant solitary scientist who builds all these things, whereas massive governments haven't got the...
And Dale Arden's the female sort of love interest.
Who needs to be rescued.
So yeah, that is kind of it in a nutshell. Obviously, being based on a comic strip, which the comic strip ran, I think, right up until 2003 in various different forms. There was obviously dailies for a long period of time, and then I think it went to, by the time it got to the end, it was a Sunday special, but it still ran for 70 years, I think. It's a long-running comic, I think, but because anybody who's familiar with paper comic strips are very short, so trying to make a feature-length movie or anything out of it, I know that there was a TV adaptation of this as well. So in the
there
50s.
was one in 2007 which lasted for one series. I think for most people though, would have got into it with Buster Crabbe during the 1930s. Serials,
right,
which were repeated. So I saw that before I actually saw the film version.
Right. See, I thought there was like a TV show. Maybe I'm just making this.
Well,
up.
it was 2007. So
right.
2007 they made one, but from the 1930s onwards, right, you had Buster Crabbe doing it, and this is where you get influence into Star Wars Episode 1, Episode 2, and these were shown at the cinema originally, and then when I was growing up, an awful lot of these cinema programs were shown like BBC Two, 6 o'clock at night, or maybe a Saturday morning. So, but it was originally aimed at the cinema before it got shown on the TV in the reruns.
Huh. Yeah, see, it seems like there was a lot of different adaptations of the film. There was a live action TV show in the mid 50s. Yeah, it ran for 39 episodes. But yeah. But there is audio stuff as well. There was an animated Flash Gordon just before the film came out.
Was it Defenders of the Earth, I think?
It's just the new Adventures of Flash Gordon, it says here. That was weird. I didn't realise that. It was quite a weird time because it didn't look like it ran very long. And the film came out in obviously 1980. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's just a bit of background about what the film is about. And now we're kind of going to talk about thoughts on it, how we feel about the film. I'll start purely because I absolutely do not like this film at all whatsoever.
Don't sit on the fence. Tell us what you really think.
There's one redeeming factor in this film for me. It's the music, and that is it. If anybody isn't familiar with it, Queen done the whole soundtrack for the movie, and it's incredible soundtrack. Great music. I will always give that a massive props. But everything else for me is just really bad. The acting's terrible. Sam J. Jones is terrible. Max von Sydow's Fall from Grace. In my opinion, he's an incredible actor. Don't know how he ended up in this film. Should have sacked his agent, I would say. The girl, Meleody Anderson, is just a bit meh. I'm not a big Timothy Dalton fan either. He was playing who played Robin Hood in the 30s? Errol Flynn.
Well, Errol Flynn, yeah.
He was trying to be Errol Flynn in a sci-fi movie, which didn't really work. He even had that weird mustache. It looks terrible. It's a film that came out in 1980, but it looks like it was made in the late 50s, early 60s. The budget was incredibly massive, considering the way the film looks. I think this is, and I was trying to think about this as well. This is like an 80s James Bond movie in space. It's very cheesy, very lackluster, and just a bit meh. Roger Moore is a good James Bond, but his best James Bonds were early 70s, and then he got a bit rough.
I would still say they're better than the 80s Bonds are still probably better.
Look, this is just my opinion. I'm just telling you how I feel about this film. And I absolutely don't like it at all whatsoever. So yeah, there's that is my opinion. Oh, and also Zarkov, Topol, the actor, played him, was in Fiddler on the Roof. Massive fall from grace there as well. I think every actor in this was either shouldn't have been in it because they should have been in. They were better actors than this movie, clearly, based on filmography, or they were new up-and-comers that just weren't very good. Sam J. Jones didn't have a career. Let's face it. People only know him from playing one movie role, and it was a crap movie role, and he was crap in it. I think that's maybe why the film holds such a cult status, is just because of how bad, but people will go, this is a bad but good film. That's what I think a lot of people say. Yeah, listen, this is me. I'm out. I'll hand over the field to one of yous two. Yous probably like this film a lot more than I do, but yeah, I've said my piece. And do you know what? Save yourself the hassle. Just go onto Spotify, listen to the Flash soundtrack. Don't bother with the film at all. Just listen to Queen's music. There you go. That's my opinion.
Well, can I?
You can go next.
Launch some sort of defence.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're right about Flash. I mean, I think that was the first time that a rock group had basically scored the soundtrack. Because normally before it was like John Barry or Ennio Morricone or John Williams, it was normally instrumentals, orchestral pieces, or things like that. So that was quite groundbreaking at the time. Sam J. Jones, I will concede, I think he might have been an American footballer before he actually was in the part. And from my understanding is, that's not his voice in the film. He fell out with, I think, Dino De Laurentiis at the end and stormed off back to America, so they had to get another actor to actually do that. So yeah, I would concede that he was not the most memorable actor, in the same with Meleody Anderson. But I would disagree about the other characters, to be honest. I mean, Max von Sydow, now I think he chose this because he was originally a Flash Gordon fan in his youth. So for him, it was like doing a Bond villain. I think he wanted to try something that was quite different. And I suppose if you're a big enough actor, you can do that, because I would imagine that he wouldn't have got paid anywhere near what he would normally have got paid for something like that. And he looks the part. He's very similar to the actor that played in the 1930s, serial. So I quite like his interpretation of it, to be honest. Very sinister. And I don't think he's too over the top in the role. But then I might be comparing him to people like Brian Blessed in it, who no one could be over the top compared to, to him. And Timothy Dalton, again, I liked his interpretation of the part. I mean, from memory, I think he's got the moustache because Prince Baron in the comic strip had the moustache, so that fits in. And he actually physically looks quite like the character in the comic strips on that. And I like Errol Flynn and Robin Hood. So if I like that, I'm going to like his interpretation of it. I thought it was one of Topol's best parts, other than being in James Bond himself as well. So, but again, it reflects, I think, the period of the 1930s. I mean, it was still the era of, you would get a solitary scientist working in his back garden who will come up with something which the combined resources of a government wouldn't actually do. And I think it's a visually stylish film as well. It's quite different to anything else that was actually going on. I think that's Jonathan is nodding his head to slightly disagree with me. But I like the colours, that they're vibrant and quite reflective of the comic strip. Even the warship Ajax, that looks similar both to the serials from the 30s with Buster Crabbe and the comic strip itself. But then every time I watch it, I'm still 12 years old. So perhaps that's why I'm more forgiving about these things after all these years.
Potentially, but I've said my piece. I don't really want to slate the film more.
He's the saviour of the universe. How can you argue against that?
Oh no, like.
And Ted recognised that as well.
No, if I was in a world and he was my saviour, that iteration of Flash Gordon, I would just be like, we're fucked.
He was, to be honest, he was quite ass at some part of the films. Like he got that first like kind of half of the film, he pretty much is just getting captured, killed, and just it's not going good for him in the first half. It's supposed to be the saviour of the universe.
But he shows a human spirit, which shows through every film against aliens that we will overcome.
I find that so funny that for some reason humans seem to have so much more like, are just so different from all these other different species. They just don't seem to have any like humanity to them.
Yeah, Kenzie, you can tell us your thoughts of the film then.
So I didn't know if I was gonna like this, and I was kind of somewhat dreading watching it. I was kind of like, I don't really feel like watching it. I'm going to have to anyway. So I was like, all right. I'm not expecting too much, but honestly, I actually enjoyed it. I actually did enjoy it. There's some parts that I really liked. There were some parts that I thought I didn't like. But overall, I did actually have fun with this film. I actually did like it. Yeah, I mean, we don't have to talk about we've already mentioned the music. The music's amazing, and there's some parts it's just like so noticeable. Of course, it is. It's Queen. But the actual film itself, I think it has a lot of charm. It's really goofy. It's really super cheesy. The dialogue is god awful at parts, like really bad. The main three actors, like the main like trio, the three trio, like the kind of the good people in it, they were all fairly poor, like acting wise. Not all of them, especially the main ones. Big Sam J. Jones was. Wow, he was bad, and now I'm reading that he was dubbed over a lot of the film as well. So I don't know who was worse. Was it the dubbed voice or was it his voice? Which they were both probably as bad as each other. But yeah, the film has like a lot. I really do think the film has a lot of charm to it. The film, I'm shocked that it came out in 1980. It looks about 15 years older, maybe even older than that. I was so shocked. The effects in this film, my goodness. When you see those like bird people flying, and it's just like, my god, it looks so bad. But even though it looks so bad, you don't mind it. I didn't mind it at all anyway. But yeah, like it got to like the first like 15 minutes, and I was not sure if I was gonna like this or not. And then that whole part happened when they throw him like the Pro Flash Gordon like the egg thing, and he starts like suddenly be able to like tackle people and stuff like that. That was a really enjoyable scene, and I was like, oh, I might actually quite like this. And then it continued, and I'm like, okay, I'm not too sure. There's some parts that I did really like. For me, the standouts in this film was Timothy Dalton and Brian Blessed. I thought they were great. I think they really, to be honest, for me, those two characters carried the film, especially Brian Blessed. I really like him in this film. He was perfect for the role. I also did really like Timothy Dalton and his role as well. Everyone else was fine. The mains weren't that good, but like everyone else in the film was fine. But those two characters, I really like Brian Blessed's character in this. It is that scene where, like during like the first kind of like scene when he's tackling everyone, he just keeps on bonking that one guy in the head. I found I was so funny. I really liked that. But yeah, I don't know how this film got made at this time and like this. I don't know hearing the budget. I don't understand. I don't know why Queen got attached to the music. Like that was shocking to me as well. The visuals are interesting as well, but I kind of like it.
I think the thing about Queen is, I think maybe their light was slightly fading at the time, and they were maybe thinking this would bring them back into sort of popular culture again. That's the only thing I can think of. But yeah, it is mad when you think of Queen now, just how big a band that they are and the landscape of music and why they're attached to such an awful film.
It's not awful. I mean, in some parts I can kind of agree. There's certain scenes. Everything's very red in this film. Like I think the main color you see is red or kind of gold, which is interesting. I can't get this film really looked like it. If I saw this film, I genuinely would have thought it came out in the 60s. I have never seen a film actually look decades old before, and I actually honestly think that's impressive because that's probably what they were going for. I'm guessing. If it wasn't, then what the fuck happened? But like, you couldn't really mistake in this film for anything else coming out at its time. But if it came out like I said, if it came out like 15 years earlier, it probably would have fit in a lot better. Maybe even older, to be honest. there were certain parts like the kind of those what are the green people called, like Timothy Dalton's people? The
I have no idea.
yeah.
Oh, they're the
It just shows you how little I paid attention to this rubbish film.
Can't remember what they're called, but their place just reminded me of like
Sherwood Forest.
a little bit like that, but also it made me think of and like the big trees. It made me think of what's that place in Star Wars? Is it? It's Endor.
Endor with Ewoks.
Yeah, it made me think of the kind
Endor.
of Endor a little bit. There was that, but like for the most part, I think this felt I couldn't really say it did look quite different. And definitely in its time, since it came out in 1980, definitely it stood out. I did mention some of the dialogue is awful, but there was like a specific scene that was so bad that I actually went, "Fuck me, that is terrible." And it's when Flash Gordon and what's the girl's name? Is it Dale? Dale?
Yeah, Dale Arden.
Yeah. They meet up again, and then suddenly she's just like, I'm trying to remember what exactly the dialogue was. They're like, "Oh, I thought you were dead," blah blah blah, and it's like, I thought when I first saw you, I was hoping it was a dream. Now I'm hoping, I can't remember, something like that. And then they say, "Oh, we can tell our kids about it." It's like, and they suddenly say, "Oh, we're getting engaged." It's like, what's happening? It's like I can't process how fast their relationship has moved. It was insane. The dialogue in that part was so bad. It was like actually laughable. It actually made me like repulsed. Like, what is going on? Fuck me. But overall, I actually did enjoy this film, even with like the early parts. I'm like, Jesus, like that is bad. But maybe that was the point of the film, to be like that, and I think it's an enjoyable film. I can see why Jonathan doesn't like it, but I can see why people do like it. It stands out. I think it always will.
I think if anybody's listened to all the episodes of the podcast, you've probably got a flavour of what kind of films I like. There's a couple of standouts that I've given really high praise to, and this is so far from those that it's unreal. There's probably a reason why I don't like it as well. I just want to touch upon it. So the screenwriter for this film is probably best known for his work on the Batman Adam West TV show of the 60s, and that's probably why I don't like this film as well, because it's written in a style that I don't like. I don't like the Adam West Batman show. I prefer the darker, grittier Batman stories, and that's probably why. If we look at when you're listening to this, the Blade Runner, we'll have done an episode on the Blade Runner, and it'll be out in a couple of years down the line. We get another science fiction movie which is much darker in tone, which I absolutely love. I'm going to still stand by the fact that I dislike this film, and I know that I've taken in what you have said and you have got your own arguments, but for me, this just doesn't hit any of the sort of things that I expect a film to hit to sort of draw me in as a viewer.
This film's definitely isn't for you. I mean, the things you look for in a film, this does not have it. It depends what you're looking for in a film. Some people just like something like this. I mean, obviously people did like it. It seemed to make profit. So, yeah, it really depends what you're into. I like that they tried to do something different and like they went to try and do a kind of older style film, because it clearly still had some people like it. So there were still people wanting to see that, and I'm kind of glad they did do it, because after this film, you'll pretty much never see any other film like that. Till now, there still has not really been a film like that. But there's some parts that probably could be made a little bit better. I think the dialogue at some parts is genuinely just that bad. But overall, the acting, even though the acting was bad, didn't actually bother me that much.
So you've got nothing, like Kenzie, you've said some bad stuff about the film.
Yeah.
Nick's just like, I love this film. It's like there's nothing bad about it.
But I'm biased. I mean, I think
biased,
that's the whole idea about these things. You look at these. I mean, I said I'm not very critical about these nostalgia films. I've got a lot of things like TV series and things like that. But I suspend my belief that I'm still 12 years old. I don't look at it as a 52-year-old man looking back on a film. I'm watching that because I'm that 12-year-old now and it's raining outside. I can't go out to play. So it brings back those memories. So all that sort of stuff is what drives me along. And again, and you'll know yourself, this is all subjective about things. Again, in the early 80s, you talked about Star Wars, science fiction was exploding in a huge way, both in the cinema and even on TV, because you're right, you'd got Star Wars, and interesting enough, the story goes that George Lucas had wanted to make Flash Gordon.
Well, I was going to bring that up. At a point,
yeah, but...
so he couldn't buy the rights to it off of, the thing about Dino De Laurentiis, he was attached to so many films. Like, he was a prolific film producer in this time period, and he bought a lot of IP, and I think that was his strength, is he bought a lot of content to make at some point. Like, he probably bought the rights to Flash Gordon 10 years before the film was made.
I think it was several years before.
So,
yeah.
And yeah, you're right. George Lucas did want to make a Flash Gordon film, but couldn't get something worked out.
Well, that's why at the beginning, when it starts at episode 4, A New Hope, if you watch, I keep referencing Busted Crab because the influence on the film, as you've pointed out, it looks like it could be made 15 years before, but that was deliberate about how they wanted to pitch it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was at the cinema, every week you went to cinema, it said episode 1, episode 2, whatever, and it recapped it, and it did that scrolling thing in there. So it's paying a homage, but it's interesting when you look at it, because was it Mike Hodges?
That was another thing I wanted to bring up. Yeah, Mike Hodges directed the movie, but he wasn't first choice or anything. Like, there was some other names kicking about, and obviously George Lucas is the famous one who wanted to make this. I think if George Lucas managed to get this IP and make it would have been a much more successful film. But I'm guessing a lot of fans of Star Wars is glad, because Star Wars wouldn't exist if he got his hands on Flash Gordon, because he would have just adapted that story. As soon as he didn't get the rights to this, he then started writing Star Wars in the sort of early 70s. But yeah, Mike Hodges is a funny one, because I think British director who was kind of more famous for things like Get Carter, Michael Caine gangster movie, which is a great piece of cinema, specifically a great piece of British cinema. It's really a weird tangent trying to picture him doing Get Carter and Flash Gordon. It seems like a worlds apart, but that's what movie directors maybe did back then, is they weren't necessarily involved in the writing process and the production process. They came and done their role and their job on a film set. But more these days is you're getting auteurs of, they want to be involved in every aspect of a film to make sure it becomes the film that they vision, because if you just let people do their thing, it might end up like something you didn't think at the start. Because I think a lot of people, when they sign on to make a film, they've got a very distinct image of how they want it to look at the end product. It's then just piecing the jigsaw together and getting to that final product. And Mike Hodges probably wasn't really involved. If he came in late, I don't think, like I said, I don't think he was first choice at all. I'm reading here that Nicholas Roeg, who done as a director who was involved in it, the writer of the film, so it was adapted by Michael Aylen, who wrote Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee martial arts film. So yeah, there was loads of different people attached. So it just, maybe he came in right at the end of the sort of decision-making process, and it was get to work, we've got a budget and a time limit to make a film.
I think also, as well, as from what I understand, was half the production cast crew were Italian, another half were American and British. And you've referenced about the writer who did the Adam West ones. Well, there's an awful lot of a fun element reflecting that. But the Italian production crew thought they were making a much darker film. So there's some really interesting points. I mean, you've got the bit when Clytus, who I think Peter Wyngarde is a fantastic actor, who's playing Clytus. When he dies, his eyes pop out his head, right?
Yeah, that was
You know,
weird.
Well, can you imagine as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old watching that, right, and his tongue's hanging out, right, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, this is a brightly coloured sort of film. This is a film which has got a fun element. That's a vicious death. And then you've got when Princess Adala is being tortured.
That seemed...
That, when you're looking back to the funny elements in the actual film, that's really dark as well.
Well, obviously, our dad's very merciless because he's Ming the Merciless.
Yes.
He just appears, and it's like Cletus says, "Should I stop the torture?"
Yeah,
and he just goes, "No," and disappears again.
Yeah.
It's like, I get there is the thing about it for me is there is dark elements to this film, and see if they went full dark, I probably would love this film because there would be so much cool things happening. But the fact is there's maybe one or two moments like that, and the rest is just this really kind of upbeat, campy, kind of spunky American Adam West kind of Batman dialogue where everything's going great and everything's upbeat and we're all having a great time. But you're not. I mean, you're in the pit of despair and the world's crumbling around you. But it's just never ever written like that, you know. And everybody's like, "Oh, it's great," and it's like.
But it's quite similar when you watch Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers, which around about the same time. Both, although they were TV series, they both had cinema releases for films. Battlestar Galactica, when you see the whole world's getting destroyed and a dam and the fleet escaping, and Buck Rogers when he finds out that he's been put 500 years into the future on that. So it's not just, I think, part of that film. I think science fiction was going two different directions, but they were wanting originally for Mark and Garth also to make Flash Gordon as a trilogy. So if it had been successful, the second would have been Flash Gordon Goes to Mars. So perhaps that could have been The Empire Strikes Back, much darker. You know, the second film, perhaps, if it had gone down that direction.
I don't know why this film didn't get a sequel. It seemed like it really wanted to make one.
Well, it was successful in the UK and Europe, but it didn't do that well in America. Right. So I think that's why it didn't get that, sort of thing. But again, there was an awful lot of science fiction kicking around at that time. And as the 80s went on, science fiction got gradually more and more darker.
I'm glad that it's not a dark film. Like I just don't think it should be at all. At certain points when the film did go a little bit darker, I thought it was fine. There were some parts where I was like, wait, like the eye popping out part. I was like, whoa, what who's this film made for? Like, cause it seems for the most part it's lighthearted and it has like a little bit. Like, was it really implied that Dale was being raped by the bad guy? It seemed like it was kind of implied.
Well, she was. Well,
this is maybe not necessarily the right time to bring this up. We have got another section,
right?
Podcast
Okay, then,
where we can maybe speak about the weird and sort of off stuff within it, because we talk about controversial topics, subjects, and themes within the movie, and that normally gets brought up there. I just wanted to. I'm not that I want to stop your conversation, but I think before we digress further into that, we should maybe just give our ratings of the film, and then we'll move on, and we'll start talking about it other like parts like in specific areas, if you're cool with that.
Okay.
I'll go first. Like you've said, there's not much redeeming qualities of this film, in my opinion. I find it really difficult to buy into any of the characters. It's not for me. And for that reason, I'm not going to give it anything. Like I wouldn't give it 1 or anything like that. But I'm going to give this a 2 out of 5. It's just not for me at all. I don't want to be super harsh. I mean, I think there's some good things in it. I think the music alone for me bumps it up maybe a bit. But yeah, 2 out of 5 for me on that. What about you, Nick? What would you give the film out of 5?
Well, I'd give it 4.
So four popcorn buckets out of 5.
Yeah.
just I think you're really biased. That
Well, I feel
it's almost like
yeah, but I feel admitted that. I mean,
Yeah.
because as I said, the way I'm looking at it is I'm 12 again. So,
Yep.
and I think this is why we all of us have probably got weird and wonderful things that we like, which other people never understand because of it. And I don't think it's just specific to that 90-minute segment of the film. It's a wider context about how it fits into when you watched it, what was going on at the time, what else was happening. And as I said, for me, I'm always 12 when I watch it. So I feel admit that I'm biased because I know being objective, if I can understand why people would give it less. And I think it's a Marmite sort of film. You either like it or you don't. There's no in-between phase for this.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't know what you could have put it better. It's literally Marmite, this film. 100%.
Right, Kenzie, what are you giving it then?
I'm a bit stuck. I'm going between either a 3 or a 3.5. And I think my original thought probably would have been a 3. But I kind of enjoy this film. Does it deserve it though?
You should.
No,
I would say the music elevates it. So whatever you think it is, always give it higher because of the Queen soundtrack.
I'm giving this a 3.5. I really enjoyed it. I really like the lightheartedness of it.
Anyway, that's us. We've given our reviews. We won't digress any further into things that we like and dislike about the film. We are now going to move on to the part of the podcast where we speak about the rules of Cult Film Cafe. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, they are low budget stroke box office flop, rewatchability, quotability, not well received by contemporary critics stroke reviewers at times, explores controversial topics, subjects and themes, and cultural legacy and impact of the film. So with that being said, we're going to move swiftly on to the first one, which is low budget stroke box office flop. Now, this film had an absolutely huge budget for the time. It says between 20 and 27 million. I'm going to estimate that it was 27 million.
Yeah, I'm going to estimate that. Almost 3 times the budget of Tremors 10 years later.
Budget was massive, $27 million. It grossed all in $46.5 million, which probably isn't too bad. And back then, I would say that it kind of didn't. It was definitely a flop in terms of what the studio expected it to do. This film, they were probably expecting to do north of 100 million, and it didn't.
Why?
Well, I just think with these films, I think when you get it goes back to original IP and things that people are familiar with. So, Star Trek Wrath of Khan came out a year later, I think 1981.
82, yeah.
Or 82, a couple of years later. And because it was something that people were familiar with, on a budget of like 12 million, it made nearly 100 million. And I think when people are familiar with it, you've got to remember that people that are science fiction fans will be familiar with the comic strip that was still probably in publication at the time. Like you said, it ran to 2003. There was audio series, there was a TV series of this. George Lucas tried to buy it. There was people interested in Flash Gordon. So that's why I think it should have probably made more money. It just didn't, for whatever reason. I think I know why, but that's my opinion. But yeah, they're kind of the base numbers. I mean, it had an okay opening weekend.
I mean, it honestly made more money than I thought it would make.
Like its opening weekend was like nearly 4 million, which is about 15% of the total gross of the whole movie. So yeah, it done okay, I think. It's just one of those where I think for a budget of that amount, considering what was coming out in this genre around about it, that's where I find it a bit lackluster for me. But like yous have said, it has something that appeals to people. It's very Marmite. Yeah, I love it or you hate it. And if you like this style, you're going to love it. It does hark back as a homage to 60s films. Well, not 60s Batman, but 60s films. There is a lot of things that like are very similar to, like I was saying, the sort of stop motion stuff of the late 50s, 60s, you know, Jason and the Argonauts and stuff like that. There is kind of similarities, not necessarily, I know that's like Jason and the Argonauts isn't a sci-fi film, but some of the effects look very, very similar. And I think if you really have got a passion about that style of cinema, you're going to really love Flash Gordon. You're not going to take into consideration when it was released, how much money was spent on it. You're going to be like, I just really love this film. But from me looking at it, knowing what other films were made for around about the same time, like Star Wars had a smaller budget, I would assume, in 1977, and made absolutely loads of money.
I think also as well, probably to remember, as I said, most of the audience going to see the films would have been probably fathers taking their young sons to it. So you can look at the production values now, and I get where you're coming from with that. But again, when you're 10 or 11, you've got no critical facilities, faculties where you're, Jar Jar Binks, if you're 8 years old when Jar Jar Binks came out, you love Jar Jar Binks. If you're a 40-something who grew up on Star Wars, you've got a different take on the character. But all the 7-year-olds I knew at the time about that. So
this is another one.
Yeah.
See, because of your age, you're an original Star Wars fan, as in the original trilogy.
I was the third person in my class to see it.
Right. And then because of Kenzie's age, or his bias to it, he's a prequel trilogy fan.
Love them.
I like the prequel trilogy.
Right. Not a Star Wars episode, but it's just funny you say that. And I understand that the different time periods capture different people.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to remember, because as I said, when Flash Gordon came out, I said, the amount of science fiction which was exploding. I was watching reruns of the original Star Trek, and then you had the films coming out.
That's the funny thing about Star Trek. Star Trek finished in like 69, 70.
Yeah, 1969. But
in terms of the original TV show.
But it gathered quite a following afterwards. And the fans kept it going because, you had the animated series in the early 70s. And
reruns were on all the time. And then it wasn't until... the actual motion picture Star Trek never came out until like years after the film.
Which probably,
finished.
if it hadn't been for Star Wars, probably would never have happened. Because that kicks... Flash Gordon might never have been made because of Star Wars, because... They're all looking at ideas now about new stuff, or what can they resurrect from the past, and bring it, out for that. So anything which either had a pedigree already, they were looking to reboot and see what they could actually do.
Right.
Sorry.
On you go, Kenzie.
I was just wondering, overall, what would you say this would be a?
Yeah, I think this is it isn't low budget, but I would probably say it flopped at the box office when you kind of, in a way where I feel as though that there was such a higher expectation in terms of what the film should have made.
Yeah.
So it kind of does, then it doesn't. It's kind of like a half tick, I would say, for this one.
It's not more like a flop, it's more like a kind of stumble.
Yeah.
To stumble, kind of fall. Than just a complete flop. But I agree with that.
So anyway, with that being said, we'll move on to the rewatchability factor of the film. So I hate this film and I'll never watch it again. So it's not rewatchable for me. I struggle to watch it. There's films that I do for this podcast I'll watch 5 or 6 times because I can't get enough of it. I struggled to watch this. I had it on twice. First time, I couldn't get into it, so I had to go back. And second time, managed to force myself through it. It was an absolute travesty for me in terms of trying to watch this film.
I was getting messages from Jonathan like, I'm struggling here. It was so funny.
Yeah, and it's not super long. That's the thing. It's like less than 2 hours. I think it's like an hour and
50 minutes.
I think it's like, add in the credits, probably like an hour and 45 minutes, and like start to finish. But it's a struggle. But Nick touched on it earlier. Like, he's more on, if he flicks it on a channel and he sees it's on and he likes what's happening, he'll watch it. He might not stay for it all, but there is a rewatchability quality to the film. It's just, and for me, and if you're into the same kind of films that I'm into, you're probably not going to watch this film again if you have. Or maybe you are like me and like all the films I like and this, which, if you do, well done.
Yeah, I think this is, like I said, right, this film really feels like a kind of like a Channel 5 Sunday film. And it's really, if you don't like it, you're never going to watch it again. You're like, bro, you're going to be like, that was absolutely god-awful. get that away from me. But if you like it, it's absolutely rewatchable. It's one of those ones that is rewatchable. For me, I found it felt a bit long. I would have liked it to be a little bit shorter. That was probably one thing I would say. I felt it kind of like the first hour was fine, but that last kind of 40 minutes, especially kind of the last 20 maybe.
I agree. I would
quite
like it to be a lot shorter, and the fact that it shouldn't exist.
But yeah.
maybe that is just subconsciously. Maybe you're right. You've came onto something. Maybe if it was 25 minutes shorter, I would maybe enjoy it more. You stumbled on it. You said the first hour kind of goes at this pace, and like I said earlier, the film opens with no backstory of that. You're like on the rocket into space within 5-10 minutes, and probably not even 10 minutes. But then, for whatever reason, in the middle of this film, there's a bit of this back and forth,
yeah.
That doesn't need to be there. It's like, let's form the army and let's go and end it, do it, done. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. Film's over. You've saved the world. Hurrah! Let Queen play out. Done.
Yeah.
Done.
The film does get a bit kind of weird at certain points because it kind of goes like, it's like Flash gets captured, Flash gets out, and then gets captured again. That happens like quite a few times. Even with other characters, they get out, then get it's like everyone's getting out and getting captured, and it's like they're kind of dancing around certain things. Like they're trying to team up, and it's like, nah, it's not happening until suddenly it happens, and you're like, oh. But I mean, I don't think it's that bad, and I don't think it would really put you off the film. Rewatching it again, so. Yeah, I think if you're a fan of the film, you're gonna rewatch it. I it's certainly one of those films. I bet. Like, how many times? Nick, sorry, I'm bad with names. Sorry about that. How many times have you rewatched this film now?
It's difficult to say because I mean, remember, I've been watching on and off over 40 years. You know, so again, it's just what. And the thing is, as well, is when you go on the internet now, fans make up. They edit things, they put things together, and what have you. So maybe you should be looking at one of the fan made,
because it'll have a better production value.
You know, where they take out the bits that
or it'll have a better production
like.
value. Kenzie asked the question, so you wouldn't know off the top of your head how many times you've seen it. I said, was it the Blade Runner or the 12 Monkeys episode? Don't know. That I've watched it probably 10 times or so. Jamie, when he was on the podcast doing Big Trouble, he watches the film once a year, and he has done religiously for his whole life. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, probably he's watched it 30 times, I would assume. Are you the same? Do you visit this regularly? Would you say you watch Flash Gordon once a year, once every 2 years, once every 5 years?
It's random, to be honest. I mean, I could find myself maybe watching 3 or 4 times in a year because it's on.
Yeah.
But I might then go by 3 or 4 years and...
So do you think you've maybe in the ballpark of 20 times or so?
I would say so.
That's a lot for times. In terms of 20 times you've watched, put yourself through this film.
It could be worse. I could have done 20 times Blade Runner. And,
that'd be fantastic.
And being so dark as a film, I'm not quite sure how that would have affected me.
Fair. Yeah, so I think we've always said our piece on rewatchability. I'll never watch it again. Nick's watched it 20 plus times in his lifetime, and he'll continue to rewatch it going forward. And Kenzie is a fan of this film, so he's probably going to say it's rewatchable, and he will probably watch it again at some point. So yeah, it is. I think you've kind of take that kind of way. Take my opinion with a pinch of salt, I would say, because we're on a podcast where 2/3 agree, and I'm just the one that disagrees. But I really don't like this film, so I'm happy to concede this fact that it is rewatchable. That has got a rewatchability factor. It's just not necessarily for me. So I'm happy to say that it is rewatchable. So yeah, quotability. That's another one. So
Gordon is alive.
I know you're only waiting for the right moment to attack him.
Yes, and Ming knows that too. So, by delivering you, I allay his suspicions. I gain time.
Our weapons are inferior. You need another year's preparation.
Ming's not unbeatable. With all his men, he couldn't even kill Flash.
Gordon's alive?
He's in Arboria. Prince Baron is aiding him.
Baron!
I tell you, now is the time to strike.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. You
right,
literally stole that from my mouth there.
What's the next question now?
The fact that this is a good one because there's been so many episodes where we start talking about all his great dialogue, and nobody really likes quotes from the
Bring
film.
the bowworms. Oh no, not the bowworms.
See, that's the problem.
What are the bowworms?
We've just started talking about it. You've named a couple. This is good segment.
Flash, I love you, but we only have 14 hours to save the Earth.
Why is that even a thing?
See what I mean about bad dialogue,
Yes.
just making great quotes?
But that's the problem. I think badly written films get remembered for the good lines.
I'm going to refer you to Ted. Have you watched Ted with
Yes,
Sam J.
Yes.
Jones? I want to thank you for saving every one of us.
Savior of the universe.
And that's his real voice, actually. You know, when for Sam J. Jones.
Yeah. No, I think I agree. I think films that are more worstly written than other films tend to have stand-out one-liners, whereas if the whole film's written well, it's probably it's hard to pick the ones out of it.
But again, I think you've got to think about the target audience.
No, that's fair. But
I mean, you can look at it as it's not Shakespeare, whatever, which is fair enough. But to a 10-year-old, it's exciting.
No, but but I think my point still stands. I think Blade Runner, for instance, is a better written film as a whole. I think the character dialogue between all the characters is better. As a technical...
Rutger Hauer disagree and make up his own speech at the end.
Well, that's a contentious subject. We did bring up. Rutger Hauer didn't ad-lib it. He asked for it to be rewritten, and even when it got rewritten, he still used some of the dialogue and then he added his own. Yes, that is true. Rutger Hauer did do a lot of line changing, but it's Rutger Hauer, and that's fine because it's Rutger Hauer. Sam J. Jones isn't clever enough to start changing lines of dialogue. Let's face it. He'll just look at a script and go, I can read that, that's fine. No, but my point still stands. I think if you look at a film which is written start to finish as a piece of work, which is better than, say, another film, it'll be harder to find the sort of standout lines because you're like, I like all of this. It's a perfectly written film. And that's kind of what we struggled with on Blade Runner, is there's a lot of depth and meaning in a lot of the things that people say, and that's because it touches on a lot of darker and sort of, it's as a darker film, and they're exploring a lot of kind of more serious tones, like, that's probably why. But there is a couple of good lines in Blade Runner. There is ones where people remember and we did riff off, but this one's a bit more definite for you. You've got a couple straight away that go, oh, that stands out to me. Kenzie's probably got a few from Flash.
My main one was Gordon's Alive. that one's so good. But I'm trying to think of other ones.
I'm bored, Clytus.
One that stood out for me is, you know, when the Vulcans are in the sky, and they're attacking, and it's kind of like a weird one because Prince Vulcan turns out and it's like a quib, it's like an off the cuff thing, but it's obviously written, and he turns around and he goes, "Ah well, who wants to live forever?"
Ah well, who wants to live forever?
Yeah,
and I was
really like that one.
Wait a minute here, because Queen done the soundtrack. They then go on and do an album, which most of the songs were used in Highlander, and they have a song called "Who Wants to Live Forever." I mean, did they just get that from that? No, probably not. But it's just weird. There's a weird tie-in that I seen. I was like,
you know, Blade Runner's futuristic, predicts the future. We've actually got a concrete example of a film which you say should have been made 15 years before, predicting the future in Flash Gordon. That makes it more accurate for predicting the future than Blade Runner, doesn't it?
But I don't think any of these films are very good at predicting the future. We said that about Blade Runner, that people that were writing science fiction films 40 years ago always thought that the world was going to be this dystopian Earth and we were going to have flying cars and stuff. We've yet to see a flying car, and it's 2022. That's us for quotability. We'll move on now to not well received by contemporary critics / reviewers. Now, at the moment, the film holds a 6.5 in IMDb based on 50,000 ratings. Rotten Tomatoes is kind of a bit of a better metric because you get a tomato meter, which is film critics, so it's got an 82% fresh rating, and the tomato meter based on 51 reviews and a 69% audience score based on over 25,000 ratings. This film was actually quite well received by critics at the time. I know that I've slated this film, but that really surprised me. Pauline Kael for The New Yorker described Flash as having some of the knowing, pleasurable giddiness of the fast-moving Bonds. The director, Mike Hodges, gets right into comic strip sensibility and pacing. I mean, I've got issues with the pacing, but I can kind of get maybe why it should be, because it is based on a comic strip, and they're just little squares, and they do move really quickly. Roger Ebert, big name, probably one of the most well-known film critics, also praised Flash Gordon, stating, "Flash Gordon is played for laughs, and wisely so. This is space opera, a genre invented by Edgar Rice Burroughs and Hugo Gernsback and other men of unlimited imagination harnessed to definitively limited skills. It's fun to see it done with energy and love and without the pseudo-meaningful apparatus of the Force and Trekkie power. It is fun, yeah, sort of, it is." He's got a point. It's not tied to these kind of other things like Star Trek, Star Wars, yeah. They are two of the bigger film critics that people know. Pauline Kael, Roger Ebert both praised the film. There is some negative reviews as well. Do you know what saddens me though? Is I'm a big Empire magazine fan. I've got stacks of them. I used to buy them every month. Not so much anymore. But Adam Smith done a review of this and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I love that. I love that magazine, and I normally agree with a lot of the writing in it. Obviously I can't, but it kind of pains me. It's like a dagger in the heart.
To be honest, I am honestly surprised that critics seem to quite like it.
I'm going to be honest. I'm the same. I'm a bit surprised when I hadn't read any of the reviews or anything like that, but bearing in mind about how it seemed to be more popular in the UK and Europe than in America. And it goes against the trend about the films, because they were getting darker. I mean, not just Blade Runner, but Empire Strikes Back, Alien had just popped up. Even some of the Star Trek movies were getting darker as the 80s went on. So it's maybe it's because it's bucking the trend, and it stands out in that respect.
I mean, if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, tomato meter 82%, so that means that average of 4 out of 5. I mean, that's you gave it 4 out of 5. Kenzie gave it 3.5. You're more in line with the sort of consensus than I am. I mean, I'm way below. I mean, I wouldn't even give this film 50%, but that's based on my opinion. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm shocked as well. There is a lot of positive reviews of.
It would have been nice if they'd made the second in the trilogy to see what direction they went. Because as I said, you've got Star Wars and then Empire Strikes Back, which is a completely different direction, with it being really dark compared to the first film. Perhaps, as I said, you might have got Flash Gordon going down a darker route or a different route.
I mean, I think the problem is it's because it's so firmly based on 30s comics. Like, this story arc, I'm guessing, was the original comic strip arc of the character that they've probably harked into with this. And there is when I searched up Flash, there was so many other stories available. And if you're only familiar with this film and you're a fan of it, go out and search. Like Nick was saying, there's audio releases from different eras. There's a 50s TV show, there's an animated show, and obviously the comic, if you can get your hands on the comic, and probably archived now, it ran all the way up in some publication all the way up to 2003 from the mid-30s. So you will, because it's that old and ran for such a long time, you will have so many different stories. I think this film only really is such a small portion of the character, and maybe that's to its detriment, but critics loved it, you guys love it, audiences that are a fan of it love it. It's very Marmite. So this is a no on the podcast. We don't give this one a tick because it was well received. Should we move on?
Yeah.
So explores controversial topics, subjects and themes. Flash Gordon. I think it's one of those light-hearted kind of movies, but I think if you try and think about the time when the original comic was written, it probably was talking about a lot of things that people were scared of at the time. You know, space travel and aliens coming to invade, and
I mean, the only
things like that.
I mean, there's a couple of things which come to mind which I hadn't really thought about until I started to look at the internet before I came on. The main character is actually quite controversial.
Yep.
For a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, you've got a white European playing someone who is very Asiatic in appearance. So you've got a white man doing that. And again, in the 1930s, as you say, there was a tendency to portray Chinese and Japanese people as villains. And I think that, from memory, probably started off with a character called Fu Manchu, which he was a Chinese member of head of a Tong society, wanted to take over the world through crime. And the British had Nayland Smith, who was the Scotland Yard Commissioner, who was, through series of books, who was endlessly attempting to stop him. And they made a TV series and also made some Hammer films in the 60s. So when you're watching that again, which again, when I was watching that as a 10-year-old or whatever, it wouldn't have impinged on my conscience, but being aware about how the world's changed, about how these things are viewed, I think they would have a problem doing that character possibly now. Certainly, if you're going to portray the character, you would have to have, I suppose, if he's supposed to, because that's the race that he's from, someone, from the, Chinese or whatever who's actually doing that.
It's one of those things that I brought up. I done an essay or a review last year about June, the 1984 film, and I reviewed the new one, but it was kind of why the new one was better. We kind of contrasted them. Yeah. And I've always stated that was one of the worst things that cinema did, is whitewashing casts back then. They never ever gave other nationalities the chance to come into these kind of big blockbuster, big budget movies. It didn't really start to happen until much, much later. And even to this day, people still talk about whitewashing happening. And just, you brought up a couple of things for me that I wanted to say. There is a problem with racism, like in Flash, that would be and discriminatory stereotypes. We haven't spoken about it, but and I think that's probably one of the positives of all these movements that have happened in the last sort of 5 years in Hollywood and the film industry, is we're starting to see change. But it should have happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It should never ever have been that way, to be honest with you. But these things probably should have been sparked a long, long time ago. And it's probably taken a long time for people to maybe have the power to speak out. But I totally agree with that. I think as a potentially kind of controversial thing, but like we always say on the podcast, you've always got to remember when things were written, not only when the film was written, but when the source material was written. The source material was written in the 30s. Things were a lot different in the 1930s to what they are now. We're almost 100 years apart. And even in 1980, things were a lot different. But I wanted to just fling this over to Kenzie, because Kenzie, you brought up a potential thing within the film story, or what was happening, that you felt could potentially be deemed a bit controversial.
Yeah, I mean, overall, really, the film's not really its fair light, but with Dale's character, it seems like it's heavily implied. I'm pretty sure I'm seeing it right, that she's heavily implied that Ming is raping her. They never they don't really show much about this or anything, but it's just kind of, they show that she's given, like, is it the slaves they give her like a drink, like, oh, a drink this, or I don't know if that's the slaves or that's just other people there, and they're just like, that will help, like, being with Ming, like, passable, or like make you want to, like, But it was not something. It didn't say it would help make you forget. It said it would.
But does she not escape though before she actually?
Yeah,
meets
so
Ming?
I think the thing is like she
Does she escape?
she no, but this is after she's aware of what the drink's doing, because when you cut to her in the bedroom, when they do the teleportation, she wakes up from being passed out. So there is that connotation. Also, just to touch on what Kenzie said about slaves, yes, they are slaves. That's another thing that could potentially be deemed as controversial in the film, as its depiction of slavery. I know that it's written and it's racial prejudices as well, but yeah, that could be. I see. What about the mind control thing? Like, see at the start, and like,
oh yeah, what was happening with that? That was weird.
What is that? Can you
started
explain
doing,
that? Like, she has like a mad. What is he doing?
Dance?
Well, he's got the ring, hasn't he?
Yeah, but what does that ring do?
Well,
what was she doing? She was like,
it's very,
what was that?
It's very.
Well, that was to try and bring her under his control. I mean, I have to confess,
Well, you watched this as a 10-year-old kid, so you probably aren't looking.
Well,
too
that's
much
the thing,
into
and
this.
to be honest, I hadn't picked up on either that one or the
bit in the bedroom.
Which, when I think back, I don't think anything happened. To be honest, I think she passes out.
But he's feeding her.
Well, this is from my recollection of it, because I have to confess, I would have to look at this again because I hadn't picked up on this. So my interpretation is different to what's been brought up. I mean, my thing about that would be that women aren't portrayed very well, because both the princess and Dale Arden are there to get captured, and then Flash rescues Dale and Baron rescues the princess. So, I mean, you talk about Flash getting captured, but he then escapes under his own steam, as it were.
Yeah.
So that's how I actually see that. I mean, the only strong female lead in that is the Inquisitor, and you're not entirely sure she's female, because when she dies, she kind of like deflates. So you get this impression that she might be some sort of robot or android or something, which has a female form. So that's why I took about they're not portrayed as being strong. I mean, even the societies, I mean, you're looking at Vulcan, you're looking at Prince Baron, the women seem to be subordinate. You don't really see them, as such. It's
there's not like a strong female character in the film.
And you're right, it's a harem that Dale Arden gets taken to.
Yeah.
On that. And the idea is that she takes that potion to make, when she meets Ming, to be a more pleasurable experience for her, on that. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Ming's going to have her as his, I mean, she wouldn't even be a queen. She'd just be probably his consort. And then with the marriage vows, it's as long as he wants to, and then he just gets rid
he's
of her.
portrayed as this, he's the ruler, like he's the dictator, he's the one that is in charge of everybody. And it's kind of like one of the arcs of the story is all these factions essentially revolting against him, this kind of ruthless dictator.
But he does a divide and rule thing, because spend that much time fighting to one another.
Well, he tries to blackmail Flash and go, I'll give you your planet or a person and you can rule like a king and stuff. He's trying to bargain because he knows, this is towards the end of the film, he knows that his power's fading, and I think it is all about control for Ming. And as soon as people start to fight back, I think that power decreases and decreases.
But I think he finds Flash quite interesting because Flash stands up to him, and he knows that they all hate him. I mean, but you get the what's the guy who says, "I don't have anything, I'll give you, give me a life." So he attempts to kill him, but again, using the ring with the control, he's put under control and then gets executed.
Yeah.
By Ming.
I think Ming's character is, if you want to, you're looking at this as a 10-year-old kid, and you don't. But when we do this podcast, we've kind of got to look at all these avenues and make sure that we touch upon things that could be deemed controversial, or maybe not necessarily controversial, but deemed in a certain way. I think Ming's character is one of those. It's all about mind control, and it's the way that is portrayed is very of the time, and it probably would be a lot different now. But yeah, I kind of agree with Kenzie that there is something at play there. But anyway, we won't digress too much further, because this could be a bit of a heavy-hitting segment, but we touched upon it. It's always nice as us as a podcast to explore these things and make sure we touch upon anything that people could deem controversial. But we've said our piece, and you look at the film through the eyes of a 10-year-old, because you get transported back, and it's very nostalgic. Kenzie, first time watch, is looking at it through the eyes of a 21-year-old in 2022, and I wish I could burn my retinas and never have seen this film. So there you go. We won't digress any further on this topic. We're going to then just touch upon quickly the cultural impact and legacy of the film, and I think this has maybe got a lot of props for it. There's, I just wanted to mention as well that as a fan of the film, you're probably a fan of Taika Waititi, Kenzie.
Certain
Just
films.
wanted to bring it up that there's still a potential reboot happening. It's been in the works since 2014, and
2014.
It's been in the works since 2014. 20th Century Fox hired J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, screenwriters, and Matthew Vaughn, who Kenzie is also a fan of, to direct it. Mark Protasevich was hired to rewrite the script in 2016. In 2018, Overlord director Julius Avery was reportedly recruited as director, so it's been bubbling under. There seems to be a thing about Flash that people love, and an animated film is under development at Disney stroke Fox, with Taika Waititi writing and directing. As of 2019, the animated film was cancelled, but in July 2021, the film was revived with the plan to make it live action with Taika Waititi still attached to it, which is potentially the right person to do this film if you're familiar with Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder. I think he could potentially capture something within this film. Have you seen Thor Ragnarok, the Marvel film?
No, I kind of lost interest.
That's fine, but there's a reason why Taika Waititi, I think, would be right. And if you watched his 2 Thor films, he's moved in to this realm of kind of MCU, but kind of space opera. The Thor films, especially Love and Thunder, I've not seen it, but people have really said, and the way it looks, it does kind of feel like that kind of film. So it is interesting to see him attached to it. And it just proves that there has been a big cultural impact, and there is a big legacy of this film. If people are still talking about it to this day and potentially rebooting it, what are we, 42 years down the line now? That's how long ago it was? Yeah. I mean, even also things like Ted, the Ted films, Sam J. Jones is brought into that, and he's kind of...
That's what I'm mainly known for.
Kind of playing him, but he is being Flash. Yeah. And I feel like if it, in the Ted universe, it's like this alternate reality where Flash saved the world and they view him as Flash Gordon and he is the saviour.
How you doing? Good to meet you.
I thank you for saving every one of us.
Oh, you're welcome. He acknowledged it. Let's do some shots.
With you?
Oh my God.
Yes, oh yes. My God, yes.
Totally, yes. Let's go.
Thanks, Flash.
There you go, my friend.
Thank you.
Death to Ming.
Yes.
Oh, you guys seem pretty cool. You like to party?
Cocaine, right?
Come on, dudes. Don't tell me you've never done it before.
Well, not recently, no.
I thought that was just for people in Florida.
You better follow me. Come on.
Johnny, I'm frightened.
We are gonna party like the 80s.
Show us how, Flash.
It's easy. We just gotta nail a lot of girls named Stephanie.
God, Johnny, I got so much energy. We better start doing stupid shit.
He's got that kind of feeling.
So with the reboot, and then Brian Blessed is actually spot on when he says, Gordon is alive! Still.
Yeah, he still is very much alive. If reports are to be told, it's a cult classic nonetheless. Definitely, we're going to move on to that pretty quickly. It's a favourite of Edgar Wright, the director, who I'm a big fan of Edgar Wright, and I'm surprised to hear that, but who used the film as one of the visual influences in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I can kind of see that. Yeah.
Oh, what? That's not even like that much
No,
though. Like, that's weird, because like I don't really see that one at all. They're quite different. But I can like a little bit, but I guess there's probably a lot of other things he also looked at as well. Probably not just Flash Gordon, because I don't think there's too much similarities between those two films. I do really like Scott Pilgrim.
Scott Pilgrim is a great film. If you haven't seen Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, check it out. Yeah, there's been some, what's that, comic, Dynamite Entertainment comic Flash Gordon Zeitgeist drew on several elements from a 1980 film, including the reappearance of the villain Clytus, who does not appear in the original comic strips. In this adaptation, Clytus again serves as Ming's main henchman. Yeah, so they're bringing elements from the film. I didn't realise that Clytus wasn't in the original comics, so he was added for the film. There was a feature-length documentary, Life After Flash.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yep. Yeah, celebrates not only the 1980 classic, it features interviews from actors within it. This is where I feel like the film is the strongest in terms of cultural impact and legacy. Like, it's very, very much in pop culture even to this day. Like, Kenzie's 21 and knows of the film. There's probably people much younger that probably know of the film. And whether that's people like you showing nieces, nephews, people your age, sons, daughters.
Well, I think the internet now does this.
Yeah.
I mean, 40 years ago when I watched the film, unless people in my immediate circles at school enjoyed the same thing I did, it was highly unlikely that you would actually know anyone else. I mean, today, you could watch a film and you don't know anyone personally who likes what you watch, but you go on the internet and you type in your film, and then you find potentially thousands of entries of people who share your love for what you've actually got as an online community. So again, this has opened things up so much more widely now. And I think this is also why, as I said, I'm now of that generation which predates the internet, but it's part of that internet as I go older. And
you're one of them Gen X people, eh?
Yeah, and you bring the issue from your childhood.
That sounded like an insult. I don't mean an insult. but Gen X is probably a good... I would say that Gen X is probably the best... What do they call them? What are they called with the Gen X and the baby boomers and...
Oh, I get confused about
people classifications of people's birth ages. And,
but again, also as well as, I mean, I'm sitting here with... Was it what Kenzie's 21?
21, he's just turned 21. 33.
33. So
we've got a great age range.
I mean, this is what's quite.
That's why the podcast works, because he's a big chunk younger than me.
Yeah, well, this is what's quite interesting. The three of us are coming from three different directions. I mean, you don't like it at all. I'm a huge fan because I was there first time round.
You're an OG.
Yeah, Kenzie's watched. Exactly. Kenzie's watched it as someone who
literally
actually likes it.
Yesterday, probably.
But as someone who is aware of. Has become more aware of this backstory towards it.
Definitely. I totally appreciate. Is anybody getting else? I know I've just riffed off like sort of legacy and stuff of the film. Is anybody else that they've got touched on? Because Kenzie on the Blade Runner episode brought up something I wasn't familiar with, because I don't really watch Red Dwarf, but apparently Red Dwarf kind of stole a lot of Blade Runner and Back to Earth episodes or specials or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can think of in your sort of science fiction world where there is some impact of Flash in this sort of newer science fiction, or there's a lot of similarities? And Kenzie, the same to you, just before we move on. And if you don't have anything, that's totally fine, but there is definitely a cultural impact and legacy of the film, though.
Absolutely. I mean, I from science kind of fiction things, I don't think I watched enough. I think I was lucky with the Blade Runner one because I watched Red Dwarf that they had done that. The only thing I really knew about was the Ted films, which I have seen the Ted films. That's why I didn't know about.
It's probably going to be the big one for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's quite a known film, and that was quite.
I'm surprised that you've even watched the Ted movies.
I'm going to be honest, I haven't watched the whole film. I just came across this when I was actually refreshing my memory and having to see what was actually out there. I mean, the thing about, as you said, Flash Gordon's from the 1930s. I mean, Edgar Rice Burroughs was doing things like Tarzan and John Carter of Mars.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is when you watch these things now, is these were the original templates for what you've got, today. The original templates of, for example, as I referred to about, you've got a scientist. He's a rogue scientist. The scientific community has actually turned their back on him. In his back garden, he's created a rocket ship or what have you, which goes back to like H.G. Wells with the Invisible Man and the Time Machine, what have you. It's a strand which you get an awful lot, in science, The Outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Flash Gordon, nice but dim, right? Hero. I mean, let's be honest. He's not the sharp.
That's been nice as well.
Yeah, but
he's not the sharpest tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, but that's why you've got Zarkov there. Zarkov's the intellectual who brings them along. And these are things now which you get standard in an awful lot of science fiction films today. The hero who is square-jawed, is going to do all the physical stuff. He is the ethically moral hero who knows what's right and what's wrong. He's got the love interest who is always going to fall for him, regardless that he's nice but dim. And but you've got that. I mean, even if you look at something like Star Trek, for example, Kirk's captain, and he's resourceful and he's intelligent, but his mentor is Spock.
Yeah, who's the clever one?
He was the clever one, and when you actually look at them in theory, they shouldn't be friends. They shouldn't, get on there. So you've got that sort of, template there about the
I see that. Like I see even things from like the science fiction from like the 50s and 60s. Did take a lot from these early science fiction writers, but it was just interesting that you brought that up. It's became the conventional norm for the genre. So that is another thing that is done for the science fiction genre.
I mean, again, you've got James Bond and you've got Q. Let's say it's those sorts of dynamics. I mean, what's changed with people like James Bond? He doesn't have a regular girlfriend, although he's got Miss Moneypenny, who does the, the unrequited love affair from afar and things like that. So, yeah, and it's interesting. We touched on about the human element before. You get all these alien races, and they all look.
Well, they're not alien, really. They're all people.
Well, that's what I'm about to say. They all look humanoid, but they're not human. I mean, Flash is. What I'm meaning about that.
They're not meant to be human. Yeah, but to us, they are very human.
But I mean, again, it's Flash who goes there and unites them all together to fight Ming. Because they're all squabbling and fighting it out and things like that.
Yeah.
So. Was about humans in which they suddenly turn up in an environment and all of a sudden the human element gets brought in. And
but there's always, just to touch on it, like it seemed like these races of alien all needed, they came under the power of Ming. Now, whether it's through mind control or just because there was somebody telling them what to do, but you get that in human race. You get leaders and you get followers, and maybe they just needed a better leader in Flash because he does unite them all together. They weren't doing that themselves. It's a better sounding way to say that Flash is a superhero and he brings all these people together and they save the day. But he's still the man at the top and he's still got people following him into battle. Very much like Ming, and he's just a better human being and he's a better person. He's not doing it in a bad sense. And yeah, that's totally fair. But yeah, I don't think there's too much more to say on this part. So yeah, that's probably a good one for this film in terms of cultural impact and legacy. And like I said, there's still talks of a reboot happening so many years down the line, even just from the film. So that is it for the rules over here at Cult Film Cafe. We are now going to move on to the short Act 3 of the podcast, where we, based on the discussion we've just had, do we agree that this film is a cult film? And if so, where would you place it in your top 100 list of cult movies of all time? Now, I won't go first because people maybe know where I'm going to go with this. So it'd be interesting to maybe see where Nick would put it. So do you think it's a cult film? Well, it's probably easy to say that
I would agree that it meets your criteria for being a cult film, yes.
That's short and sweet, but yeah, it's quite easy. We've had a long sort of winded conversation. So based on that, would you put it in your top 100 cult movies of all time?
Yes.
Do you know whereabouts you would put it in terms of a number or a ballpark? Kenzie does definitive numbers. I ballpark it. You can do either, or you could just be like, well, I would put it in my top 100 and that's fine.
I would probably put it between 20 and 30.
Fair.
Because and the reason I'm doing that is, although I'm a huge fan of it, I'm aware it's because I'm a huge fan that I'm not objective about it. Yeah. So, looking at it in the two ways, if I'd said the subjective thing, which is what I like, fair enough, but being objective, I'm aware of the validity of the criticisms of the actual film, but it doesn't detract from me having an immense enjoyment from it.
No, that's nicely said. So, Kenzie, what about yourself?
It is absolutely a cult film. I would see it as a cult classic. Just everything about it. Like, there's some films you just look at and it's like, that's just a cult film. It obviously is. From the time that it came out, I'm surprised it was like received quite well. But yeah, that genuinely was kind of surprising. But for everything else about it, yeah, this film. If this film didn't become a cult film, I genuinely wouldn't know how. Just because of just the type of film it is, like so many things about it. Kind of the old look to it, which now looks even older now, but it looked old when it probably came out. Yeah, I absolutely, I would see it as a cult classic film. It's just it's what if you're thinking of cult films, I think it's one of the ones. I think I've said this before as well, but like it is probably one of the ones you'll eventually think about. Even if it's not straight away, it's like one that's like right there. Like if you think of a cult film, Flash Gordon is definitely one. It's a cult classic. Not that everyone likes it, but people do love it. It's very much like Marmite, as it's already been said. It's people will not care about it, but people will love it, and that following who love it genuinely do really like it. So it's absolutely a cult classic film. As where would I put it? I think I'll put it bang smack in the middle. I think I'll put it at 50. I think that's fair for that type of film. I think it should be in the top 100, and I think it bangs back in the middle is the right place to put it. Just like so you're like, all these films you should check out, and in the middle, also this is the one you check out, and then other ones that I think are more worthy to watch.
Well, there you have it. Yeah, Kenzie and Nick both agree it's a cult film and should be placed on the top 100. Well, sadly, it's over to me. No, I don't really like this film, but I agree that it's a cult film. Would I say it's a cult classic? Possibly. But yeah, you know my feelings about the film already. But this may surprise you, though. I would put it in my top 100 because I feel like it should be there. Like Kenzie said, it's probably one of those films that if you were to think, it would come to you quite quick, and if that's the case, you probably should make a list like this. But I would have it quite sort of high up, not high up in terms of close to 1, I would say close to 100. I'm going to put it at sort of between 90 and 100 at the minute, but that's based on my opinion. I still think you should watch it if you're into cult films. But yeah, there's better cult movies for me, in my opinion. Blade Runner. It's a lie though, because it's not a cult film.
That's not a cult film.
12 Monkeys.
12 Monkeys. Okay, I agree with that.
Anyway, so yeah, we all agree it's a cult film. We've all placed it inside the top 100. And yeah, go and check it out if you haven't already. And yeah, that is it for this episode of the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure as always to break down another one of these films on the list. And as always, if you would like to get in contact with us at the podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Cult Film Cafe, and if you would like to email us, you can email us at thecultfilmpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, if you'd like to get in contact with me personally, I am 081331 Productions on Instagram, and Kenzie is
Doge_dogs.
That's his Instagram @ and yeah, we'll plug his dying Twitch stream as always. You can find Kenzie not streaming, but he might at some point. But if you're into streams, you can find Kenzie over on Twitch at
twitch.tv/CrumpetStickman.
Hopefully he gets
I will be
back into
streaming
his Twitch streaming. He's been saying this for about the past month. Anyway, yeah, if you're into gaming and all that good stuff, and as always, I'll drop the handles in the descriptions on Spotify and YouTube and all that good stuff. Sadly, our guest isn't a social media user, or we would put an at to find him. He's an incredible person, very knowledgeable, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Nick. It has been an absolute great experience, and it's been great to talk about this film with you.
Thank you very much for inviting me along. It's been much appreciated.
Do you think you'll come back on?
I'd love to.
So we can maybe sort something like that out as well. So yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. So it's a goodbye from me.
It's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me as well. Thank you.
And as Brian Blessing would say, Gordon's alive! Podcast it, everybody. There we go. That's a long podcast.
It was quite. No, you were great. You were great.